So Nikko Jenkins murdered 4 people in Omaha, Nebraska in 2013. He did it on the command of the ancient Egyptian serpent god Apophis. Nikko actually first entered the justice system at age 7 after he brought a handgun to school. And in 2003, at age 17, he was finally sent to prison for 2 armed carjackings. In 2009, Nikko was convicted and faced up to 5 more years in prison for assaulting a prison guard. In 2011, a county district judge sentenced Nikko to 2 to 4 years in prison. However, the judge ordered the terms to be served concurrently, with his already sentenced prison time. So, Nikko Jenkins was out of prison early in 2013. And that's when things get worse. In July 2013, 26-year-old Nikko Jenkins would finally step out of prison. Then, less than 2 weeks later,
the white F-150. We got 2 parties inside the vehicle, appear to be shot in the head. And can you send a squad to our location?
Juan Uribe Peña and Jorge Caiga Ruiz were found shot to death in their car in Omaha, their pockets turned inside out. 8 days later, at around 7 a.m., the body of Curtis Bradford was found. He had been shot twice in the back. It was later revealed that Curtis and Nikko had posed for a Facebook photo the day before. Out of all of Nikko's victims, Curtis Bradford was the only one he knew. They had met in prison. Nikko's 4th and final victim was Andrea Kruger. Her body was discovered on August 21st at about 2:15 a.m. by a deputy sheriff responding to a shots fired call. Her body was found lying in the road with multiple bullet wounds. She had been returning home after a bartending shift. That evening, Andrea's SUV was found abandoned 12 miles away. Police later revealed they believed the SUV had been abandoned about 2.5 hours after being stolen, and that a feeble attempt had been made at setting the vehicle's interior on fire. And so Nikko became one of those, serial killers. Nikko Jenkins was arrested on August 30th after a woman, an ex-girlfriend of Nikko, said that she saw one of Nikko's cousins give Nikko a gun, and he had also threatened to kill her family. And while the police had him in custody, more evidence against Nikko began to mount up, and the police, they actually gathered surveillance footage of a woman close to Nikko buying ammunition, distinctive ammunition that was used in the murders. And on September 3rd, 2013, Nikko Jenkins confessed to the 4 murders.
I got your DNA at the murder scene. I got your DNA in the car. Sir. I got the weapon. I got Nikko Jenkins.
My point is this, though. This family didn't deserve this.
Right.
This could have been prevented had it not been for the Nebraska Department of Corrections doing what they knew what they supposed to have did. And they never gave me an opportunity. They never gave me an opportunity for treatment because I wouldn't take the medicine.
He was charged with 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of being a felon in possession, and 4 counts of use of a firearm. He already faced charges for terroristic threats when he threatened a woman's family. They also arrested the man who gave Nikko the weapon he used in his killings. In November of that year, Nikko had been in jail about 2 months at this time. He decided to write a letter to the Omaha World Herald. In the letter, he asked the paper to help him and the families of his victims, and he writes that he will plead guilty to all charges. He writes that he wished to get the help he so clearly needs, psychiatric treatment, as the health department had full knowledge of Apophis and the demonic forces at work. Yes, this is real life. In February 2014, Nikko filed a federal lawsuit seeking $24.5 million from the state of Nebraska for wrongfully releasing him from prison and not giving him mental health treatment. He also blamed corrections officials for the 4 murders he committed. Now, at this point you're probably thinking, judging by his upbringing, the time he spent in prison, his crimes, the interrogation footage, the letters, Mother of God, this poor man, he never got the help he so clearly needed. The system failed him. He never got any treatment for the issues he so clearly has. This was a complete failure of the health system. Well, twist. After the judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation of Nikko Jenkins, the psychiatrist concluded that he had antisocial personality disorder and was likely faking psychotic symptoms, and that he was making up the voices he heard as a way to justify his actions, essentially finding that he's a sociopath who would not be amenable to treatment. After being declared competent to stand trial, the court case began. On his request, Nikko was allowed to represent himself. Throughout the trial, he maintained that he acted under the command of Apophis, and still did. On April 16, 2014, the judge found Nikko Jenkins guilty of all 4 murders. Now, during Nikko's time in prison while awaiting trial, he decided to pass the time by making some body modifications. For example, in 2015, he had the superb idea to 666 onto his forehead, or rather he tried to. The he made on his face was backwards, funnily enough, because he did it looking into a mirror. So now it just looks like a bunch of upside down 9s, I guess. But if you were to see him in a mirror, holy sh! He also decided to put the word Satan on his face. I mean, come on dude, somebody has to clean that up. He would constantly and mute himself because he just loved and got off on the reactions of fellow inmates. But when the other inmates wouldn't react and wouldn't call for medical aid because they presumably were just used to it, that's just Nikko doing Nikko things, then he would start to panic and be like, oh, I need help. He did all this with razor blades, no one knows how he got them, someone was obviously slipping them to him. And, oh boy, he took an action that many would consider drastic. Listen up, lads. He attempted to cut his with a razor into the shape of a serpent. Prosecutors have said Nikko told prison employees that he self-mutilates so he can use the insanity defense and embarrass the administration.
This morning, attorneys argue if Jenkins' IQ was high enough for him to even have a death penalty hearing. A test when he was first incarcerated in 2003 suggests his IQ was 69, which is under the threshold. Jenkins himself objected to his own attorney's questioning and wanted to get right to the 3-judge panel.
I want to expose these temporal physical evidence in this perjury that these officers committed before I was ever charged.
In May 2017, 3 years after he was found guilty, the delay was essentially the multiple psychiatric evaluations he had, Nikko Jenkins was sentenced to death by a 3-judge panel. He was also sentenced to 450 years in prison on weapons charges connected with the murders. Seems a bit like overkill, but
Each one of these murders was a deliberate and planned act. The victims were pre-selected and the murders were purposeful. Therefore, this panel finds that the death penalty is appropriate, should be, and is hereby given for each of the 4 murders by the defendant.
Now this case is as insane as Nikko Jenkins is. However, multiple psychiatrists, after they evaluated him, said he was sane, he knew what he was doing, yet he would be like, no, an Egyptian snake god told me to kill people, I need treatment. However, there are conflicting reports, and some psychiatrists did find that he had schizophrenia, but when they prescribed him medication for this, he would, every time without fail, refuse to take the medication. Honestly though, regardless of his mental state, he never really had a chance. He had a upbringing surrounded by people. And he did start taking medication finally in 2018, and apparently his mental state improved. I mean, he clearly has some deep-seated mental, serious psychotic issues. Right? Well, most recently, this year in 2019, the court rejected the notion that he had any mental illness, and if you're mentally ill, you can't get the death penalty. So, either he is seriously mentally ill, or it's the defense trying to prove it, but the court, they're not having any of it. However, this case was clearly brought about by a sick mind, a system that failed somewhere along the road, and it ended up with 4 people losing their lives. It's disturbing, tragic, and everything in between. And that's the story of Nikko Jenkins.